The sun hovered low over the parched roofs of tumble brush, casting long, sorrowful shadows on the dusty road that led to the town square. Wind dragged grit through the air like a whisper of judgment, scraping over wooden porches and iron hinges. On the edge of it all stood Clara May Dalton, 27, widow, castaway. Her once gloved hands now bore the red trace of rope burn where soft cloth had been tied, not tight enough to hurt, just firm enough to say she belonged to no one. Clara kept her eyes down, but she could feel the weight of their gazes. Rough ranchers, hollow-eyed widows, wide children who clung to their mothers' skirts. A woman who couldn't bear a child was less than whole in tumblebrush. Less than useful. Her dead husband's family made sure everyone knew she'd failed in the one way a wife wasn't allowed to. That man, buried 6 feet under the frozen clay of winter, had taken more than her piece when he died. He'd taken her place in the world. Now she was nothing but goods to be auctioned. Miss Hattie Blevins, round as a whiskey barrel and twice as loud, stood beside her with a ledger in one hand and a sharp tongue in the other. Now, don't y'all crowd in. We got ourselves a fine housekeeper here. Cooked for a mining man, tended a proper home. No children, of course. Womb didn't take, but her stew surely did. A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. Clara didn't blink. She felt heat rise in her chest, not from embarrassment anymore, she'd run out of that months ago, but from some deeper, older ache. The kind that turns to stone. Sheriff Clay Lancer leaned against a post, arms crossed, chewing a toothpick. He kept order in tumblebrush, but not fairness. Not decency. He'd signed off on this transaction with no more concern than if they were auctioning a mule. "Let's start at $10, Miss Hattie called, waving her hat toward the crowd. 10 for the widow? No hands rose. A pause hung heavy in the heat. Clara could hear someone clear their throat. A baby cried. She stood still as marble. 5. Miss Hattie tried again, voice thinning. From the back, boots crunched on gravel. Slowly, every head turned. He was taller than most remembered, or maybe the years had just straightened his spine more than age should allow. Dakota Red Elk walked with the deliberate calm of a man who never wasted a step. His long dark braid was laced with silver, skin browned by sun, eyes the shade of river stone. Beside him trailed 6 children, quiet and barefoot, eyes full of questions. The youngest, a girl of about 9, held a basket of prairie apples. She looked at Clara the way a child might look at a bird with a broken wing, unsure whether to approach or turn away. Dakota stopped 10 feet from the block and looked straight at Clara. Not at her shoes, not at her waist. Into her. She'd never seen eyes hold so much silence and say so much. $5, he said. A collective gasp stirred the air. Miss Hattie blinked like someone had slapped her. Red Elk, she said, squinting. You already got 6 young uns to feed. You need a wife or a miracle. He didn't answer. His gaze didn't leave Clara's face. Miss Hattie stammered but turned toward the sheriff. Sheriff Lancer shrugged. Ain't illegal, he muttered. A bid's a bid. A strange flutter pulsed in Clara's chest. She hadn't realized she'd stopped breathing until she exhaled. She didn't know what she expected, a grinning outlaw, a lonesome drunk, maybe someone crueler than the last. But not this. Not a Comanche man known more for his silence than his sin. Not someone who looked at her like he understood what being discarded felt like. He stepped forward, reached up, and gently untied the cloth from her wrist. His fingers were warm, calloused, careful. When the knot loosened, her arms fell to her sides like weights set free. She didn't speak. Neither did he. But something ancient passed between them in that still moment, something unspoken and undeniable. He turned and nodded for her to follow. She hesitated, her feet unsure. Then, gathering the last threads of dignity wrapped around her soul, she stepped down from the block and followed him through the parting crowd. No one cheered. No one wished her well. The only sound was the shuffle of boots on dirt and the low coo of a mourning dove watching from the church steeple. The children walked behind them like shadows, whispering in a language Clara didn't know but found oddly soothing. Eliza Ray, the youngest, lingered closest to her side, casting sidelong glances filled with wonder. As they reached the edge of town, Clara glanced back once. Tumblebrush stood still, watching her go, as though hoping she'd turn around and beg to return. She didn't. They rode double on a painted horse with a worn saddle. The sun began to set, melting gold across the horizon. The wind picked up, bringing the scent of dry grass and sweet dust. The land stretched open before them, wild and unyielding. Clara didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask what he wanted from her. She just held on, not to him, but to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this was not the end of her usefulness, but the beginning of something quieter. Something true. Hours later, when the prairie had swallowed the town behind them and stars freckled the sky, they reached a modest homestead by a shallow river bend. Children scattered to familiar corners. Dakota helped her down, wordless still. She was surprised when he didn't lead her into his own room, but instead to a small structure beside the main house. A cabin. Her own space. He pushed open the door to reveal a cot, a basin, a table with a clay pitcher of water. A blue blanket folded neat at the foot of the bed. "No one owes you anything here," he said finally, voice low and thick with gravel. "You stay if you choose. Leave if you need." Clara stood there, the full weight of his offer pressing against the hollowness inside her. No obligation. No chains. Just space. He turned to go, pausing only to light the lantern by her window. Warm glow pooled across the wooden floor, spilling like sunrise. And then he was gone. She sat on the cot, the blanket soft beneath her fingertips. In the quiet, she let out a breath she hadn't known she'd held since her wedding day. She wasn't bought. She was given a choice. For the first time in years, sleep found her without fear. And for the first time in her life, she dreamt of something she might build, not as someone's burden, but as something whole. And the stars outside burned a little brighter for it. The days that followed did not unfold with grand gestures or spoken confessions. They came quietly, like spring thawing frostbitten ground. Clara woke each morning to the sounds of chickens rustling and children's soft chatter in the main house. At first, she remained apart, sweeping the small cabin, boiling her own coffee, folding and refolding the same worn apron. But slowly, like a door easing open on tired hinges, her life began to fit into the rhythm of Coda's world. It began with bread. One morning, she brought a warm loaf to the porch of the main house and left it there without knocking. She returned to her cabin and waited. Minutes passed. Then, the creak of the door and Eliza Ray's small voice floated out behind it. "It's soft in the middle, Papa." No one came to thank her, but that night, someone placed a bundle of fresh berries at her doorstep. The children were the first to pull her in. Eliza brought her a broken doll to mend, then stayed to watch her stitch it back together. Soon after, the others followed, asking for help with buttons, braids, stories, songs. They came not out of duty, but with quiet hope, testing her gentleness like a creek tests the strength of its banks. And Clara, for all her caution, let them come. Coda remained quiet, always present, always watching but never intrusive. He spoke to the children in Comanche, guided the boys with their horses, showed the girls how to skin apples without waste. At dusk, he would sit on the porch with a pipe and a whetstone, sharpening tools with the patience of a man who had nothing to rush. Clara began to join him, at first in silence, then with slow words that tested the air between them. "You carved the brush, didn't you?" she asked one evening, holding the curved handle in her lap. He nodded once, not looking up. "Why? You needed one." The simplicity of his answer struck her harder than poetry. She had known men who used gifts to buy obedience, who used words to decorate lies. But this was different. His giving had no transaction in it, no expectation. The town had labeled her barren. But here, in this patch of wild land with 6 barefoot children and a man who spoke more in gesture than in sound, she was beginning to bloom again. The true test came unexpectedly. Clara offered to take the children into Tumble Brush for sugar and bolts of fabric. Coda hesitated, not out of distrust but worry. She saw it in his eyes, the knowledge of how cruel that town could be. But he let her go, handed her the coins without question, and watched them ride off beneath a late autumn sun. The town had not changed. Its people still carried the same hollow stares and tight smiles. As Clara stepped into the mercantile with Eliza at her side and 2 older boys behind her, the air thickened. Whispers flicked like horseflies around her ears. Miss Hattie, hunched at the register, lifted her brows in mock surprise. Well, look what the wind dragged back. Red Elk's little household helper. Clara smiled softly, not out of politeness but resilience. Just here for sugar, Miss Hattie. You finding yourself useful now? Thought you couldn't bear fruit. Clara kept her voice steady. Turns out it ain't just fruit that feeds a house. The clerk behind the counter coughed to hide a grin. Eliza stepped forward, clutching the edge of Clara's skirt, her small face flushed with confusion. Miss Hattie's voice dropped to a hiss. They'll never truly take you in, girl. You'll always be just borrowed. Before Clara could answer, Eliza lifted her chin. She's our mama, she said, voice high and trembling. She makes pancakes and sings in the morning, and Papa laughs more since she came. We didn't borrow her. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Clara knelt beside Eliza, heart pounding, eyes glistening. I'm here because I choose to be, she said, standing again. And no one in this town gets to decide what I'm worth. They walked out with heads high and arms full. As the sun began to sink, their wagon wheels creaked toward home. Clara's spine straightened with each mile they put behind them. The children dozed against one another, full of sweets and victory. At the homestead, the scent of wood smoke drifted on the breeze. Coda met them at the gate, eyes sweeping over each child, then resting on Clara. He didn't ask what happened, but something in her gaze told him everything. Later that evening, after the children were fed and asleep, Clara sat on the porch with her hands resting in her lap. Coda joined her, pulling his coat tighter against the growing chill. They said I'm still borrowed, she murmured, more to the wind than to him. His eyes stayed on the horizon, but his voice was steady. Borrowed things are returned. You were never borrowed. I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid I didn't belong anywhere. You belong where you're seen. She turned to him then, truly looked, at the man who had given her space instead of demands, who had let her rebuild herself without molding her to fit him. His face, worn by sun and grief, softened under the starlight. I don't know what I am to you, she said quietly. Coda reached for her hand. His touch was warm, calloused, deliberate. You're not something I found, he said. You're someone I met. The words didn't bloom like roses. They took root like trees. Clara looked up to the sky, where stars were breaking through like truth after silence. She felt the fullness of the land beneath her feet and the warmth of his hand over hers, and in that stillness, she realized she was no longer surviving, she was living. She leaned her head gently to his shoulder. It was not a declaration. It was an answer, and in the quiet of the prairie night, where nothing rushed and everything mattered, a woman once sold for her emptiness had become the heart of a home.